So you are ready? We'll start.
Yes, yes, absolutely, sir.
So, fine. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening episode of Pursue. This is Pursue 18E, which is hematology, malignant lymphoid, and plasmacytic diseases. We are streaming live from Basavataram Indo-American Cancer Hospital and Research Institute, Hyderabad, a very famous place via Kolkata. And today we have a very good topic: plasma cell neoplasm, general consideration, classification, and the ABC of myeloma. To talk on that, we have somebody who's an expert in myeloid and lymphoid neoplasms, Dr. Manasi Mundada. She's an MD, DNB. She's a consultant pathologist at the famous Basavatarakam Indo-American Cancer Hospital and Research Center, Hyderabad, with areas of interest in leukemia and lymphoma workup, flow cytometry, and molecular biology. Before I ask Madam to start, let me request all of you to please keep your mic muted, your camera off, and at no point please don't share your screen. With this, I would request, ma'am, please share your screen and let us start. Thank you.
Very good evening. I hope my slides are visible.
Yeah, absolutely clear. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nadine sir, for inviting me again here. It's a wonderful platform, and it's always a pleasure to be here. So the topic for today's discussion is our plasma cell neoplasms, general considerations, classifications, and ABC of multiple myeloma. So let us start with the overview about plasma cells. So let us see what are plasma cells, how they are formed, where they are formed, and where do they function. So if we see the plasma cell development, they are formed from the terminally differentiated B cells. So these terminally differentiated B cells, as we know, they arise from the hematopoietic stem cells in the bone marrow, which forms the clonal lymphoid progenitors, further maturing into pro, pre, and immature B cells. And at this immature B cells, they are released into the circulation as the naive B cells. These naive B cells go and home themselves in the lymph nodes. Here in the lymph nodes, when they are exposed to some antigen, they get activated. The first reaction after activation, say to a microbial antigen, is to produce plasmablast. These plasmablasts are produced from an activated B cells in the marginal zone layer that is surrounding the germinal centers. Then, after undergoing 2-3 divisions, the B cell program gets switched off and the plasma cell program is activated. So, forming a plasmablast, which then matures into a short-lived plasma cell. What's the function of a plasma cell? It has a main role in humoral immunity. So, it secretes lots of immunoglobulins or antibodies, as we know. So, this is the first and the quick response by the plasma cells. So, they are the short-lived plasma cells. Some of these activated B cells, however, enter the germinal centers, and here, through various mechanisms, they again undergo maturation. They can mature in the form of a memory B cell, or they can again mature into a plasmablast. So again, the mechanism is the same, that the antigen exposure is there. However, they take some time, they undergo some clonal proliferations and finally mature into a B cell, memory B cell, and a plasmablast. These plasmablasts can either again form a short-lived plasma cell or the long-lived plasma cells. These long-lived plasma cells, they basically go back to from where they came, that is the bone marrow. So they travel back all the way back to the bone marrow, where they go and home themselves into the niches, and they persist to stay there for many years. So what is this CSR and what is this somatic hypermutations? So CSR stands for clonal switch recombination, and SHM stands for somatic hypermutations. So whenever the first response happens, as we know, it is the IgM production by these plasma cells. However, later on chronicity and there happens this class switch recombination wherein the type of antibody gets changed from IgM to say IgG, IgA, whatever the body requires. And this happens via the somatic hypermutations. These somatic hypermutations are nothing but the genes that are required to produce the particular class of antibody. They express this gene, they mutate themselves to make that gene, which will cause this clonal switch recombination. So as we know, the main function of a plasmablast or a plasma cell is to secrete immunoglobulins or antibodies. It is said that a plasmablast can secrete as many as 1,000 immunoglobulin molecules per second. So that is the rate at which it can form immunoglobulins. All of us have studied the structure of immunoglobulin. Let's have a quick revise. It has two chains, the heavy chain and the light chain. Both the chains have a constant region and a variable region. The variable region is also the antigen binding site. The light chains are of two types, kappa and lambda, and the heavy chains are of 5 types, G, A, M, D, and E. So what happens in a myeloma? Whenever, as we had seen in the previous diagram, it is a replica of that diagram here, that the B cells are clonally proliferating in the germinal centers. Then there is this T cell mediated response and to the antigen, which causes formation of a plasmablast. However, at this stage, what happens in a myeloma is that there can be a deleterious mutation in these plasmablasts. So a deleterious mutation in the form of a IgH mutation or a hyperdiploidy. When this happens, this clone, this is the first genetic hit that the myeloma cell gets, and this is the clone which gets the clonal advantage. So if we see MGUS, which is the precursor of pre-malignant condition, as we all know, there is presence of this IgH or hyperdiploidy, either or both together in these clones. However, when a second hit happens in the form of, say, deletion 13q or amplification of 1q, this the particular clone gets the proliferation advantage, and that particular clone, hit after hit, gets clonally selected to form the major or the bulk clone in a multiple myeloma. However, that does not mean the other clones do not exist. That's the beauty or the heterogeneity of multiple myeloma, that we know that these clones, they persist along with it, though not proliferating. So what happens when we try to curb a particular type of mutation, say a RAS mutation? If we try to curb that mutation through a targeted therapy, it will curb that clone which was having RAS mutation. As soon as this clone curbs, the selection pressure on the other clone happens, and they start to proliferate. And that is why the disease relapses, and it is sort of called as an incurable disease. So with this background, let's venture into the plasma cell neoplasms, which is an umbrella term. So these neoplasms are they secrete a clonal immunoglobulin and are secreting proliferation of terminally differentiated B cells. So the origin, as we have seen, is from a B cell, and their characteristic is they secrete a single homogeneous immunoglobulin or molecule, which we very popularly call the cell leukemia. There's even light chain myeloma here. The other type is a plasmacytoma, which can be a solitary plasmacytoma of the bone or an extraosseous plasmacytoma. Then there is monoclonal immunoglobulin deposition disease, which can be in the form of a primary amyloidosis or a systemic light or heavy chain or both deposition diseases. And then this is another category wherein the plasma cell neoplasms are associated with few paraneoplastic syndromes, very seen sometimes as the POEM syndrome, and the Tempe syndrome is a very, very rare category here, and it is at present a provisional category. So though we are following the WHO classification of plasma cell neoplasm, it is the International Myeloma Working Group guidelines which define what are the criteria to call it a multiple myeloma. So IMWG has laid down two must criteria to call it a multiple myeloma. The first is clonal bone marrow plasma cells more than 10%, or biopsy proven bony or extramedullary plasmacytoma. The second important point to be there should be one of the following things should be present called the myeloma defining events. It is nothing but it is what tells you there is the evidence. These are the evidence of end organ damage, or the popularly called the CRAP criteria. So there is hypercalcemia, renal insufficiency, anemia, or bone lesions. So this were the criteria that were, this was the definition that was there since 2014. In 2016, IMWG included 3 more conditions wherein presence of which we can call it a multiple myeloma. These have been called as the biomarkers. What is a biomarker? It is nothing but a characteristic that can be measured to tell whether a particular condition is a physiological one or a disease one. So what are the biomarkers that are included in the 2016 classification? There should be a clonal bone marrow plasma cell percentage of more than 60%. Involved is to uninvolved serum free light chain ratio of more than 100, or more than one focal lesion on MRI studies, at least 5 mm in size. So these were the new additions that we see. Let's have a quick peek at the historical perspective of multiple myeloma. So the first case of multiple myeloma described in literature was of the famous and the rich tradesman Thomas Alexander McBean, which was described in 1844. That time he was a 45-year-old gentleman who complained of fatigue and a very observant finding that there was stiffening of his body linen by his urine. He was a very outdoor kind of person. So in one of his excursions, he fell down and had a fall and a rib fracture, which was treated by Dr. McIntyre. And he recovered from that episode. However, the very next year, there was the severe pain he suffered, and this time he consulted Dr. Watson, who prescribed him streel and quinine, which had traumatic effect. But Dr. Watson too observed the similar kind of complaints that he had, or the observation he had about his urine. And he sent this to Dr. Henry Benz Jones, who was a chemical pathologist with a very famous London college. So in that interesting expert that I found on the net, he wrote, "Dear Dr. Jones, the tube contains urine of very high specific gravity. When boiled, it becomes slightly opaque. On the addition of nitric acid, it effervescens, assumes a reddish hue and becomes quite clear. But as it cools, assumes the same consistency and appearance that which you see. Heat liquefies it. What is it?" So Dr. Benz Jones, since he was a chemical pathologist, he studied this thing quite in detail, and he reiterated the fact laid down by Dr. Watson, and laid down the significance of finding this oxide of albumin, as he called it, in people suffering from mollitus osseum. Mollitus osseum is nothing but the softening of bones. So this laid the foundation of the Benz-Jones protein test that we know as of today. The second case was of this very unfortunate young woman, 39-year-old female, Sarah Newberg, who, as you can see in the pictures, had multiple fractures and hence a lot of dysmorphism that was there in the body. Unfortunately, she could not survive, and when she died, Dr. Solly did the autopsy and drew similarities between the McBean case. And he rightly pointed out that there is replacement of earthy matter of bone and is flushed out of the body by kidneys. This is what we know of as of now, that what is flushed out of the body are the light chains that are secreted in many of these patients. Some more interesting points about multiple myeloma. The term plasma cell was coined by Voltaire in 1875. In 1922, the very commonly used tests kappa and lambda assays, these Baines-Jones proteins were discovered by Baines-Jones and Wilson, and he named them after the technicians Congold and Lipari. In 1937, Tiselius identified the immunoglobulin molecule alpha, beta, and gamma. And it was in 1961 when Jan Waldenstrom introduced the concept of monoclonality versus polyclonal immunoglobulin increase, which has laid the foundation of a multiple myeloma being a clonal disorder. So multiple myeloma, they comprise 1% of the malignant neoplasms, 10 to 15% of hematological neoplasms. There is a slight male preponderance that we see, and they are very common. They are more common after 50 years of age. In etiology, chronic antigen stimulation, exposure to toxins, and radiation have been described. However, the details or the intricacies of these are not available. However, what we know is there is always a precursor lesion called the MGUS. And if we screen population more than 50 years of age, we are bound to find this lesion in at least 3% of the population. And it is known to progress to multiple myeloma at the rate of 1% every year. We'll see this entity in a little more detail later. So what are the clinical manifestations of myeloma? As we know, it has a very broad spectrum of manifestations. If we try to take the M protein, what are the manifestations that these increase in M proteins cause? Very important is the chronic renal disease. Associated with M protein are also neuropathies, hyperviscosity syndromes, and amyloidosis. Though there is so much of immunoglobulin floating around, but these immunoglobulins are defective. Hence, there is immune deficiency, which causes lots of infection that can be seen in around 15% of the people suffering from multiple myeloma. And the very important is the marrow infiltration by these neoplastic plasma cells, which causes destruction of bone, which leading to hypercalcemia, bone pain, and the most common presentation of a multiple myeloma are the lytic lesions seen in 70% of the population. Also, the infiltration of the marrow by plasma cell causes decrease in the hematopoietic precursors, hence there is anemia and other cytopenias. The cause for anemia, apart from this, is also the chronic renal disease that we have seen can be a manifestation. So what is the mechanism of lytic lesion? The myeloma cells secrete two types of substances. One are the osteoclast activating factors, which are the macrophage inflammatory proteins and the interleukins. And the other are the osteoblast deactivating or inhibiting factors, which are in the form of TICOF, F1, interleukin 3, interleukin 7, and others. Also very important is the role or the interplay between the myeloma cells and the stromal cells. These myeloma cells affect the stromal cells in the way via the Rankel receptors and the interleukin 6, when this interaction causes the stromal cells to secrete substances which activate the osteoclast. And so we know that there is a genetic basis to multiple myeloma, but this stromal interaction also has a very important role in the pathophysiology of this disease. The renal disease, there are two mechanisms of renal damage, the immunoglobulin dependent mechanism and the immunoglobulin independent mechanism. In the dependent mechanism, there is cast nephropathy, commonly called the myeloma kidney, the monoclonal immunoglobulin deposition disease, and the light chain amyloidosis. The independent immunoglobulin independent mechanisms are due to hypercalcemia, sepsis, tumor lysis syndrome, and very rarely direct infiltration of the kidney by the myeloma cells. So this is a cartoon of the nephron. Here we know that the free light chains are filtered into from the glomeruli into the tubules, and these are the ones which are most toxic to the nephron. So when they are filtered and they are present in very high quantities, they tend to stagnate and form waxy casts in the tubules, which is known as the cast nephropathy or the myeloma kidney. In glomeruli, there can be AL type of amyloidosis, and there might be light chain deposition disease along the basement membranes. And then there are other things like Fanconi syndrome and excessive endocytosis. So till now we have seen the common manifestations that you see in a case of multiple myeloma. I have two very interesting scenarios where the diagnosis was a multiple myeloma, however the presentation was very different. This is our own case wherein this gentleman presented with a chest wall mass which was biopsied. When biopsied, we saw, yes, there were, as suspected, it was a plasmacytoma, and there were, as you can see, lots of plasma cells, which we proved it to be a monoclonal type with a kappa immunoglobulin light chain restriction. However, along with that, there were these large pink cells which were there and formed almost a 50% component of the lesion. These were nothing but the histiocytes which had consumed these light chains, and this was we published this case as a case of crystal storage histiocytosis. And the bone marrow again here showed not many crystals, but histiocytes were showing these granular material, the granules that were there, and these similar granules were also seen in the plasma cells. Another case, interesting case, came in recently. Here again, this was a lymph node biopsy that we received, and when we got the section here, what we saw was this sheets of these cells. On high power, you can make out these are the plasma cells, and they were lambda restricted plasma cells. However, along with these patches, what you see of very refractile substances that is laid down and showing some crackling artifacts and some giant cell reaction around it, was the amyloid deposition that was seen. So an extra osseous plasmacytoma along with amyloid deposition is indeed a rare presentation that you might come across. So how do you investigate a case of myeloma? So it has three arms to it: the investigations, the radiology, the biochemistry, and hematology. And all the investigations have to be analyzed in conjunction. Only one is, it's difficult to put a case down as a myeloma just on one finding. So in radiology, the investigation of choice is a PET CT scan, which tells you about the extent of the disease. Not only that, it also tells you which are the avid areas or the areas of activity that we can make out on a PET scan. The MRI is also a very useful investigation. It is especially useful over a PET CT when there are focal bony lesions and the osteolysis has not begun. So that can be picked up on MRI. Also, it is useful in cases when there is an extramedullary disease or a cord compression, which can be picked up on a MRI. In biochemistry, in this investigations, X-ray and all are a little outdated now. These investigations have sort of taken over and are much more useful to pick up these lesions. Yeah, coming to biochemistry, we have to do all these investigations in tandem. It's the serum electrophoresis, immunofixation studies, serum free light chain assays, urine immunofixation studies, and these investigations listed till now are diagnostic as well as useful in monitoring the disease. The other investigations here, the serum creatinine levels, LDH, calcium, beta-2 microglobulin, these are important in prognostication of the disease, as we will see later. In hematology, there is this CBC, complete blood counts, ESR, which is raised in almost all the cases. Then there is bone marrow aspiration and biopsy, flow cytometry, and the molecular prognostic panel, which has become the standard of care. So what do we see in the peripheral smear? The RBCs generally are normocytic, normochromic. Then there is this Roulet formation. Roulet formation is nothing but these stacks of RBCs that are lined one above the other. And this Roulet formation happens due to presence of immunoglobulins in the blood. In WBCs, there can be penias, there can be a leukopenia, there can be a normal count, or there can sometimes even be a leukoerythroblastic reaction. Platelet counts can be normal or decreased depending on the extent of disease involvement of the marrow. Bone marrow aspiration is a very important investigation. It has to be supplemented with a trephine biopsy. So generally in a case of myeloma, we see a very hypercellular marrow, and there is variable number as well as distribution of the plasma cells. Hence, count can be varying. There can be areas where you might find these plasma cells in sheets. However, there can be areas where they are very patchy. So we have to, the counting should be done balancing both these areas to give a more accurate, precise count on the marrow. Let's see the morphological features of a normal plasma cell. So a normal plasma cell is a cell larger than the small lymphocyte. It, as you see, it has a moderate NC ratio. The nucleus is round with a speckled, very mature chromatin, which is called even the clock face or the cartwheel chromatin. Then there is presence of this perinuclear off, which is due to the Golgi region that is there in the cell, and the cytoplasm stains very blue due to the presence of immunoglobulin. So this is a very mature plasma cell or a normal plasma cell as we know. What happens in a myeloma, like in this case, this marrow, it was a very hypercellular marrow, and then there were these sheets of these plasma cells that we see. So in a multiple myeloma, these plasma cells can be very mature looking. So just because the plasma cells are looking, normal does not make it just plasmacytosis. There are instances when we have seen myelomas showing a very normal looking plasma cells. Like you can see this perinuclear HOFs, there is a binucleation here that is happening. At the same time, there can be areas wherein, there is a little pleomorphism that happens in these. Like you can see, there are these plasma cells which are smaller and these ones that are quite, distended with large cytoplasm. This variability is known to happen in myelomas. Then there can be another little immature looking plasma cells. When do you call them immature? When there is alteration in the NC ratio, when the nucleus seems to be a little enlarged in size and the chromatin not so mature. Here, like we can see, the chromatin pattern seems to be a little more fine and reticulated compared to the normal plasma cells that we saw earlier. And then sometimes you might even pick up a nucleoli here. There might be loss of perinuclear HOF. All these are features of a atypical plasma cell. Sometimes you can see these cytoplasm. Generally, we see that the cytoplasm in a normal plasma cell or in any atypical plasma cell is still blue, but at times it is distended and very eosinophilic due to the presence of generally told to be a IgA type of immunoglobulin. So these are the cells, the flame cells that they are called, showing a very bright red eosinophilic cytoplasm. Then there are these Mott cells, wherein the cytoplasm shows a multiple, almost evenly sized globules that are there, which are nothing but the immunoglobulin molecules distending the endoplasmic reticulum and giving the cell a Mott or a morula appearance. Sometimes there is a presence of a single eosinophilic, vacuole in the cytoplasm, which we know is the Russell body, and its nuclear counterpart is the Dusher body. You might see various types of multinucleation. There can be a bi, tri, quadrium, penta, multinucleation that can be seen in plasma cells. So all these features that we have seen, the morphological features of plasma cell till now, they are all features, they don't point towards malignancy per se, except that might be the atypical plasma cells that we saw. All these can be there in the reactive plasma cells too. So presence of any of these features does not make it an abnormal plasma cell. So what are the features of an atypical or abnormal plasma cell? These kind of, very enlarged large cells showing pleomorphism, this prominent nucleoli. The plasma blast, these cells which show a moderate NC ratio. The nucleus is enlarged. See the chromatin; it is so much like a blast, a myeloid blast that you see. Very fine reticulated, homogeneous chromatin, and there can be conspicuous nucleoli at times. The perinuclear half is gone. Overall, the cell size is enlarged. So this is a plasmablast. At times, these plasma cells are known to show varied and great pleomorphism. We have had cases in our lab where I don't have a photograph to show to you right now, but these plasma cells, they had such pleomorphic features, and again the presentation was a lytic lesion, query metastasis, query multiple myeloma. So in such cases, even we had to put up a PCK to prove that they are plasma cells and not evidence of metastasis per se. So they can be very deceptive, and they can take up very ugly forms too. And then there are these tadpole-like cells, which are showing these cytoplasmic excrescences, very huge nucleus, very high NC ratio. So the nuclear abnormalities is what makes a cell suspicious of being a neoplastic plasma cells, nor does the presence of Mott bodies or multinucleation or Duscher bodies. Then there is this very interesting small cell variant which we had encountered. Here the plasma cells are very small, something like a what sometimes you describe in LPL plasmacytoid lymphocyte-like, wherein the cytoplasm is very scant. It's not that blue looking. The nucleus NC ratio is quite high, and they can be confused with lymphoplasmacytic lymphomas or the Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia, as we know. To make matters worse, they show IHC by CD20, which we know is a marker of a B cell So this CD20 is aberrantly expressed in this small cell variant of multiple myeloma, and it also shows a cyclin D1 IHC positivity, which corroborates with the translocation 1114 that is seen in the small cell variant, and they are known to have a good prognosis. So as I told you earlier, trephined biopsy should and always must complement a bone marrow aspiration, especially in areas where you are having a very patchy disease. You might not have a very good plasma cell count on bone marrow aspirates. So at these times, the trephined biopsy comes in handy. In a trephined biopsy, a good length trephined biopsy, you are able to see multiple intratrabecular spaces, and hence there might be areas where you can pick up this diffuse kind of involvement of the trephine that we can see. There are these on HiPAR, we are able to see there are sheets of these plasma cells here which are involving and replacing the normal hematopoietic precursors. Here there is even presence of a Duscher body. Many times the plasma cells do not involve the marrow, the trephine, like in a diffuse manner. They just tend to creep along the interstitium, retaining the normal architecture of the marrow, as we see on HiPAR. So if you see this marrow just seems to be a little hypercellular one to us. But if we go deeper in the interstitium, we are able to see there is prominence of these plasma cells. The advantage doing a trephine is that we can put up a IHC2 on these to enumerate the clonal percentage of plasma cells, which so much forms a definition of multiple myeloma. Says there should be more than 10% clonal plasma cells, which we can establish the clonal nature by IHC on trephine sections. So very rarely we can have even a hypocellular marrow like this, which were showing sheets of blast. The history was very typical. The biochemical investigation in this case showed a deranged immunoglobulins. There was an M band. Hence, there might be areas where we can still find multiple myeloma with this kind of hypocellular aspirate. However, one point of caution here, what I would like to point out, many times I've seen with my residents, like a case comes of a hypocellular marrow showing these normal-looking plasma cells, sometimes forming sheets, and they tend to label it multiple myeloma. Many times, these cases are what there is a clinical suspicion of aplastic anemia. So in aplastic anemia, we know that there might be prominence of plasma cells, or the residual cells are the lymphocytes and plasma cells. So the diagnosis on a hypercellular marrow showing sheets of plasma cells should not be based on just the plasma cell, presence of plasma cells or increase in the number of plasma cells. It has always to correlate with the clinical findings and your biochemical investigations. So this is a trifine biopsy from one of the cases wherein we saw there was this pale pink homogeneous amorphous material deposition showing this crackling artifact. I don't have Congo red pictures to show you, but this stained beautifully with the Congo red staining, showing the very popular apple green bifringence that we see. So this was the case of amyloid deposition that you might pick up on trifines. Ideally, you should be doing Congo red staining on all the trifines that you do for your myelomas, because you might just pick up this very innocuous presence of these amyloids, and the best area to look for amyloid in not a florid case, not like this one, is that the perivascular location is where you can pick up these amyloid deposits in a case of multiple myeloma. So this was another very interesting slide review we had received. So there was this suspicion of a multiple myeloma in this case, and when we stained the smears, we saw that the smears showed this very blotchy appearing material that was there on the aspirate. Sadly, we did not get a trifine for this case, but this was a case of diffuse involvement or deposition of amyloid in the bone marrow, so much that the aspirate showed predominantly amyloid component and very few scattered plasma cells here. So though rare, we might encounter these kind of scenarios too in practice. So what's the role of IHC? Like I stressed earlier, it is to be done on trifine sections to establish the percentage of clonal plasma cells, because the definition as of now says that the IHC, the trifine should be used as the to prove the clonality and the percentage of plasma cells. The markers that we commonly use are CD38, CD138, CD45, MUM1. These are all 38, 138, MUM1. They are markers of plasma cell differentiation. CD56 and CD117, we also use these markers. These are the aberrant markers commonly seen on atypical plasma cells. Then kappa lambda to prove the clonal light chain restriction. CD20 is also put just not to miss a case of a lymphoplasmacytic lymphoma. And as we know, CD20 is generally negative in multiple myeloma. What's the role of flow cytometry in multiple myeloma? The first is in diagnosis to establish the clonal nature of plasma cells. Then presence of aberrant markers to establish the neoplastic nature of plasma cells. So presence of these aberrant markers, which we will see in the next slide, points towards the neoplastic nature of the plasma cells, along with the kappa lambda clonality restriction that we can see. And this aberrant phenotypes, they predict progression of a smoldering myeloma to multiple myeloma. So flow comes in quite handy in cases of in identifying these cases of smoldering myeloma, which are at a higher risk of progressing to multiple myeloma. It is also very important to identify minimally invasive plasmacytomas. Again, if there is presence of clonal plasma cells in the case of plasmacytoma, wherein the number of plasma cells is usually less than 10%, and presence of clonal plasma cells makes it a high risk factor that the plasmacytoma might progress to a multiple myeloma. It can also be used to identify circulating plasma cells in peripheral blood. Very important role is in MRT assessment and is being used quite widely. However, there is one caveat in doing flow cytometry. Whenever the plasma cell percentage is low in the marrow, what the percentage you find on the flow cytometry may not corroborate with morphologic assessments. And as of now, we do not have a percentage on flow cytometry that will tell you, yes, that this much percentage of plasma cells on flow cytometry makes it a multiple myeloma. That definition is not yet available. So how do you identify the abnormal plasma cells on flow cytometry? So there are these backbone markers CD45, CD38, and 138, of which we know CD38 and 138 are markers of plasma cell differentiation, and CD45 is a marker of hematopoietic cells. So in an abnormal plasma cell, the CD45 is downregulated, and so is CD38. Along with that, CD138 is upregulated in a abnormal plasma cell. Sorry. Then other markers of aberrancies here are, let me point out the positive markers of aberrancy which are there on abnormal plasma cells. It's CD20, CD28, CD33, CD56, and CD117. There are other markers in the form of CD305, CD200 that also come in handy many times. CD19, CD27, they are negative or weak in abnormal plasma cells. So using this combination of markers, we can sort out the population of atypical or abnormal plasma cells from the normal plasma cells by flow cytometry. So what are the biochemical tests? They also form the backbone in the diagnosis of multiple myeloma. The three commonly used tests are the serum protein electrophoresis, the immunofixation studies, and the serum free light chain assays. So serum protein electrophoresis is a method of separating protein based on their net charge and size. So serum is placed on a specific medium. Generally, it's the agar that we use, and a charge is applied. Under the influence of this charge, there is migration of protein, which is studied. So if we see here, I have just put down two prototypical cases, one of a normal electrophoresis result and one of an abnormal electrophoresis result. What we see here is a very broad albumin band, which tells you this is a serum electrophoresis. In urine electrophoresis, there is no albumin band as such present, and only a monoclonal band is seen. So unless and until you have a lot of albuminuria happening along with it. And then this normal band, you see there is a very broad albumin band, and then there is this globular region divided into the alpha globulins, beta globulins, and the gamma globulins. So in majority of the cases, the monoclonal band or the M protein comes to lie in the gamma globulin region. However, it can come and it can be seen in other regions too. This is graphically represented here. So what advantage SPEP gives you is you can quantitate the amount of M protein. What's the importance of quantitating? It gives a prognostic significance in cases wherein the presence of M protein more than 2.5, like in a case of a plasmacytoma or a MGUS, makes it a high risk category for progressing into a multiple myeloma. Similarly, presence of albumin, the quantitation of albumin is important in prognostication. So how do you interpret electrophoresis? Presence of a sharp M band is representative of a monoclonal protein. It is a cost-effective technique and screening and diagnosis for the screening and diagnosis of monoclonal gammopathies. The M band is considered to be measurable if it is more than 1 gram per deciliter in the serum or more than 200 milligram per day in the urine. It can be quantified. This is a sort of semi-quantitative test that we do, which is useful in even assessing the response to treatment. And then there are recommendations of doing urine electrophoresis at least 3 to 6 months to pick up renal complications that may result in albuminuria. What are the caveats? It does not tell you the type of immunoglobulin class or the light chain derangement. It might be false negative in light chain myelomas, wherein only light chains are secreted and there are no associated heavy chains. And it is important to interpret the M band carefully if it falls in locations other than the gamma globulin region, as we saw earlier. So next comes the immunofixation studies. It is used to identify the heavy and light chain involved in disease. So it has two phases, the electrophoresis phase, like the previous one we saw, followed by a fixation phase. In the fixation phase, what we put are the different antisera. Most commonly used are the IgG, IgA, IgM, kappa and lambda antisera. And the band that is formed is fixed by these antisera. The presence can be seen on a on the electrophotogram that we will come across later. It is more sensitive technique than SPEP. How do we interpret? Again, similarly, a sharp band corresponding to the antisera added depicts the heavy and the light chain. So if there is only light chain with no heavy chain band for GAM, it should not be taken just like it's a light chain myeloma. We need to rule out the IgG and IgE myeloma. These are very rare, but yes, if we don't screen any test that is showing just the light bands, we might be missing out on these myelomas. The caveat is it's a qualitative test, so we cannot quantitate the amount of the band that we are seeing. So this is an immunofixation electrophoresis that we are seeing. Here we are seeing the G band, wherein the antisera has reacted with the monoclonal antibody present here, giving a G band and a kappa band, making it a IgG kappa type of multiple myeloma. The third investigation are the serum free light chains. These are the quantitative assays which use antisera directed against the epitopes that are generally the constant regions on light chains that are exposed only where light chains are free in solution. So whenever this test is done predominantly on serum, so in serum we know that the complete immunoglobulin molecule is secreted, along with there might be some free light chains. So when we put this antisera, we apply this antisera, it will go and bind only to these epitopes that are exposed in free light chains. Hence, we will get a quantitation of only the free light chains, not of these light chains that are bound to the heavy chains. So this is quite specific test. The antisera have approximately a 10,000-fold stronger binding affinity for free light chains, and this assay can be used specifically to quantitate free light chains even in the presence of large concentration of polyclonal serum immunoglobulins. So there are reference ranges that are defined by the lab for the free kappa and light chain. The number here is not important. What is important is the ratio here. The ranges are different for serum and urine, as you see here. So there are many conditions wherein just the kappa and light chains might be spuriously or increased due to some disease process, or decreased for that matter. However, the number here, absolute number, does not point towards the clonality. It is the abnormal or distorted ratio that is important. So clonality interpretation for diagnosis is on the derangement in the kappa lambda ratio. So abnormal concentrations of kappa lambda can be due to immune suppression, wherein both the kappa lambda or a particular type of immunoglobulin light chain might be suppressed. Immune stimulation, like you see in autoimmune diseases, reduced renal clearance, and of course the clonal plasma cell proliferation, wherein the ratios can be deranged. So point of caution here is that in patients with severe renal impairment, renal reference range of kappa is to lambda changes. It becomes 0.37 to 3, and because there is some retention of these due to impaired renal function, there is some retainment of the light chains, and hence the ratio needs to be taken with caution. A little higher ratio is recommended. This test is useful for measuring treatment response. Let's see the clinical variants of myelomas. The MGUS, it is defined by presence of M protein less than 30 gram per liter, clonal plasma cell percentage less than 10, and no CRAB features. There is also a light chain type of MGUS, wherein abnormal free light chain, there is abnormal free light chain ratio with increase in light chains with complete loss of heavy chains. Morphologically, there are no pointers towards the abnormal nature of plasma cells. They just look like mature plasma cells. IHC can enumerate the CD138 percentage, but the light chain restriction cannot ascertain the polytypic versus monotypic plasma cells, and hence flow cytometry can come in handy to separate the normal plasma cells which might be existing in the bone marrow from the clonal plasma cells due to presence of various aberrant markers. So what are the high-risk features of MGUS? MGUS, as I had told you earlier, it has the risk of progressing to myeloma of 1% every 10 years. So there are some features which which points towards that this MGUS might be a bad one or might progress to a multiple myeloma. So knowing these features, these patients can be followed up more stringently, more regularly. So it's the size and the type of M band. So if the percentage of M band is more than 25 grams per liter and it is of IgA type, they are supposed to do worse than the other types. The serum there is a deranged serum free light chain ratio. There is marked aberrant plasma cell percentage on flow cytometry. Generally, they say if more than 95% of the plasma cells that you have isolated are showing aberrant markers, they connote a high risk feature for MGUS progressing to multiple myeloma. And then there are high risk cytogenetics that are there, like 1p deletions, 13q deletions, 14-16 translocations, which make the MGUS a high risk MGUS. The next type, clinical variant, is the smoldering myeloma. The definition says the serum M protein, the urinary M protein, the percentage, clonal plasma cell percentage, these all can be the same just as it is in myeloma. However, what makes it different from a active myeloma or a myeloma that needs to be treated are absence of myeloma defining events or the CRAB features that we saw, or even presence of amyloidosis. This absence is the only thing that is different that from a smoldering myeloma to an active myeloma disease. So generally these patients are asymptomatic and incidentally detected when working up for something else. The significance of identifying smoldering myeloma is that they are known to progress to myeloma. The percentage is much higher than that of MGUS. So it's 10% in the first 5 years, 3% in the next 5, and 2% in the next 5 years. Again, here there are high risk features wherein there are recommendations that these smoldering myelomas need to be treated actively and not just left and monitored. So what are these features? If there are more than 10% clonal bone marrow plasma cells, more than 30 grams per liter of M protein, bone lesions on MRI, high percentage of plasma cell with aberrant phenotypes, and abnormal serum light chains. So these kind of smoldering myelomas need to be actively taken upon and likewise treated. Then there is a plasma cell leukemia, wherein the peripheral blood plasma cell count is more than 20% or the absolute plasma cell count is more than 2000 per microliter. Recently, there has been a recommendation of including cases of more than 5% plasma cells in peripheral smear to be taken as plasma cell leukemia. It is a very aggressive disease with bad prognosis. The primary variant or the de novo plasma cell leukemia are much more common than the secondary, which develop after when a multiple myeloma progresses into a plasma cell leukemia. Organomegaly, lymphadenopathy are more common than the lytic lesions, and they show a very high risk genetic abnormalities. So this is a slide of a plasma cell leukemia where you can see these scattered plasma cells that were there here. A high bar showing the abnormal plasma cell in the peripheral blood. Light chain myelomas are when only light chains are seen in immunofixation studies with no corresponding heavy chains. What's the significance of a light chain myeloma is, as we had seen in the nephron cartoon, these light chains are very toxic to the kidney. So they generally present with renal failure. Bone disease and systemic light chain depositions can also be seen, and they are very prone to cause this tubular nephropathy or the myeloma kidney. So it is important to identify these light chain myelomas. So in these cases, the immunofixation studies might not show any of the heavy chain bands, but light chains will be there. Then there is this very interesting category, the non-secretory myeloma, which constitute about 3% of the myeloma cases, where there is absence of light and heavy chain in serum or urine. However, if we try to see on IHC, almost 85% of them might show a cytoplasmic M protein presence. So this makes them a oligosecretory myeloma. However, there are still 15% cases which are truly non-secretory myelomas. So they have a low incidence of hypercalcemia or renal disease. Solitary plasmacytoma of bone, the definition says it should be a biopsy-proven solitary lesion of bone or soft tissue with evidence of clonal plasma cells. The bone marrow plasma cell percentage is less than 10%. There is no radiological evidence of skeletal lesions, and there is absence of end organ damage that can be attributed to plasma cell proliferative disorder. They are more commonly seen in sites of active bone marrow replications, the vertebrae, ribs, the pelvis, that are the flat bones. Then we have an extraosseous plasmacytoma too, the case that I had shown of the lymph node. However, they are more common in the upper respiratory tract mucosa, GI tract can also show these extraosseous plasmacytoma. However, there is a need to differentiate them from extraosseous deposition of plasma cells versus a plasmablastic lymphoma versus other B-cell lymphomas. So the thing is, generally an extraosseous plasmacytoma is a solitary lesion that you see, or they might be multiple in rare cases. However, when it is an extraosseous deposition of plasma cells, it is generally an advanced stage of disease, wherein there will be very active myeloma symptoms that the patient might be having, and we might find these extraosseous deposits of plasma cells along with them. Amyloidosis, it is the primary type that is associated with multiple myeloma. There is deposition of light chains which undergo structural conformations, or the beta pleated sheets that they form, which is called the amyloid. They are more common in the subcutaneous fat, kidneys, heart, GI, and bone marrow. Congo red staining, on Congo red staining we can pick up this amyloidosis. The confirmatory tests, however, are electron microscopy and then mass spectrophotometry to characterize the amyloid subtype. Coming to the genetics in myeloma, it is a very important and a very interesting topic. The cytogenetics and FISH are the tests that are commonly done in routine practice. However, in clinical trial settings, there is role of gene expression profiling too. So if we see the classification of multiple myeloma, the genetic classification, they are of two types, the hyperdiploid type and the non-hyperdiploid type. It can be either, this non-hyperdiploid type is generally the IGH translocations that you see. So in hyperdiploid type, there is more than 3 chromosomes. They show duplication, they show increase, diploidy, and they are generally the odd numbered chromosomes like the 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, which forms the hyperdiploid type. In non-hyperdiploid type, they are further categorized into 3 types of translocations or mutations: cyclin D translocation, NST2 translocation, and the MAF translocation. In cyclin D1, you have the 1114, 614, and 1214. They generally are associated with a standard risk type of myeloma. The 414 falls into the intermediate type, while these are the high risk type of translocations that you are seeing. There might be another 15% which are unclassifiable, and very rarely the hyperdiploid and the IGH translocation might coexist together, so they are not per se mutually exclusive kind of mutations. So the IMWG has recommended a FISH minimal panel, comprehensive panel. So at least a 414, 1416 and deletion 17p should be tested in any new case. However, it is always good to do a more comprehensive panel comprising of 1114, deletion 13, ploidy category, and chromosomal 1 abnormalities. The FISH that is done here is on cell sorted sample. That means that the bone marrow is plasma cells from the bone marrow are separated either by magnetic separation, and these concentrated plasma cells are then tested for these abnormalities on fish. So the other cytogenetic abnormalities are the deletion 1p, 1q amplification, 13p deletion, 17p deletion. All of these connote a bad prognosis. So this is the standard, intermediate, and high risk that we have discussed. Deletion 17p, 14, 16, 14, 20. These are the high risk abnormalities, and these type of myelomas, they do badly compared to the standard or the intermediate risk type of myelomas. So as we have seen in the initial pictures, the primary event is either IGS translocation or a hyperdiploidy, which is present even in an MGUS. However, as different types of genetic hits keep happening, the grade of myeloma, the severity of myeloma goes on increasing. However, there is a role of the somatic mutations, the MAP pathway of KRAS, NRAS, or BRAF genes. These are mutually exclusive mutations that happen, and they connote a bad prognosis. So staging, earlier we were using the Dury-Salmon staging, then came the ISS staging, and now recently the RISS staging for myeloma is used. In ISS staging, we know that only two categories, there were two parameters only that were evaluated, the serum albumin and the serum beta-2 microglobulin. However, with the advent of these genetics that has happened, there has been addition of cytogenetics features, the high-risk features, into the classification, as well as the serum LDH level. So in a stage 1 type of myeloma, all of the following should be there: the serum albumin more than 3.5, the serum beta-2 microglobulin less than 3.5, no high-risk cytogenetics, and a normal LDH. In stage 3, the beta-2 microglobulin is more than 5.5, and there is presence of these high-risk cytogenetic abnormalities or an elevated LDH. And when either of them is not satisfied, it falls into a stage 2 type of category. A very small peek at the treatment. The common regimen that is used nowadays is the VRD regimen, which comprises of bortezomib, lenalidomide, and dexamethasone in induction regimen, followed by a autologous stem cell transplant, which is a definitive treatment. And these patients are then maintained on lenalidomide in standard risk or a bortezomib in high risk cases. There is even a role of daratumumab. This is a new monoclonal antibody that has come in against CD38. So to summarize, the ABC of myeloma is anemia, bone lytic lesions, Bence-Jones proteinuria, and chronic kidney disease. The entire pathophysiology and symptomatology of myeloma revolves around these features. The bone marrow examination and clonal plasma cell percentage forms the backbone of classification. There is emerging and established role of flow cytometry in myelomas. The SPEP, IFE, and free light chains, they should always be done in tandem, never in isolation. And fish panels have now become standard of care. Greetings from Basatarkam. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. If you just could stop sharing so that we can see you.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Just let me see if there are any questions on the YouTube. Very comprehensive and very nice compiled presentation. Almost everything of myeloma has been covered, and right from the beginning, from the morphology to the genetics. Very well done, Dr. Manasi. Excellent job.
Thank you, sir.
I don't see any questions there, and I don't see any questions here as well. So I think I would request you to share the PDF so that we can upload it on the Google Drive. Thank you so much, ma'am. Taking out time from your busy schedule. Take care. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.